They thought she was just another struggling mom walking into the hospital with her newborn baby, exhausted from the long nights and heavy heart that only a mother could know. But what happened next would leave the entire staff shocked, humiliated, and speechless. Because 10 minutes after a nurse laid her hands on her, slapping her across the face while she held her child, this black mother revealed a truth so powerful it shook the hospital to its core. Before I take you inside this unbelievable story of pain, resilience, and shocking justice, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because stories like this one are the ones they don't want you to hear. Stories that remind the world that no matter how quiet someone seems, they may hold power beyond imagination. And trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. It all started on a rainy afternoon, when the young mother walked into the hospital, clutching her baby close to her chest. The fluorescent lights of the lobby buzzed faintly overhead, the sterile smell of antiseptic filling the air, but what she carried in her arms was anything but ordinary. The baby was only days old, wrapped tightly in a faded blanket, sleeping peacefully despite the storm outside. The mother's eyes showed exhaustion, but behind them burned a fierce determination. She had come for something simple, routine care for her child, but the moment she stepped through the hospital doors, the weight of judgment began pressing down on her. The receptionist barely looked up. With a roll of her eyes, she muttered something under her breath, her tone sharp, her words dripping with disdain. The mother stood silently, waiting, her child's soft breathing against her chest the only comfort in that cold lobby. Minutes passed, then the nurse appeared. Tall, stern-faced, her eyes narrowed the second they landed on the mother. Without warmth, without compassion, she barked orders. Sit down. Wait. Don't ask questions. The young mother obeyed, whispering to her child, her hands gently rocking him in rhythm, trying to block out the tension building around her. But tension has a way of snapping, and in that hospital room, it snapped violently. The nurse returned, her face hardened even further, her patience apparently gone. She accused the mother of lying, of wasting time, of not deserving the care her child needed. And then it happened, the moment no one would ever forget. The nurse's hand cut through the air with vicious speed and landed against the mother's face. A sharp, cruel slap. The sound echoed across the room. Gasps filled the hallway. The baby stirred, crying out, and the mother staggered but did not fall. Her hand instinctively shielded her child, her eyes wide with shock, but behind that shock, something far more dangerous began to rise. The nurse sneered, certain that her authority was untouchable, certain that this mother was powerless. But in that single moment, with that single strike, she had unknowingly unleashed a storm she could not control. Because this mother was not just any woman. She was the silent force no one in that hospital saw coming. And in less than 10 minutes, the same nurse who raised her hand against her would be standing in disbelief as the entire staff faced consequences they never imagined. The room went silent after the slap. For a moment, even time itself seemed to freeze. The mother's cheek burned with pain, but her eyes did not water. Instead, they narrowed ever so slightly, her lips pressing into a thin line. She adjusted her baby in her arms, rocking him softly, whispering words of comfort as though the storm outside meant nothing compared to the one that had just erupted inside the hospital walls. The nurse stood tall, arms folded across her chest. The smugness of someone who had gotten away with this kind of cruelty before. She looked around the room, daring anyone to speak. No one did. The receptionist avoided eye contact, pretending to shuffle papers. Another nurse peeked from a distance, but quickly vanished behind a curtain. To them, it was just another poor mother, another woman they could intimidate without consequence. But what they didn't realize was that the mother they had just humiliated was no ordinary visitor. She wasn't just another name on their charts or another complaint to brush under the rug. This was a woman who carried power far greater than any of them imagined. She had walked into that hospital not only as a mother but also as someone whose voice could command entire rooms, whose decisions could shape careers, whose authority extended far beyond the white coats and cold stares of the staff around her. The nurse leaned closer, her voice dripping with contempt. People like you should be grateful we even let you through the door. Don't think for 1 second that you're special. Sit down, shut up, and don't cause trouble. Her words were meant to break, meant to crush. But as she hissed them into the mother's face, she failed to notice the calm, deliberate way the mother took a single step forward. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't rage. It was control. Silent, poised, unshakable control. The baby's cries quieted, as if sensing the strength pulsing through his mother's heartbeat. She stroked his tiny head, then slowly lifted her gaze, locking eyes with the nurse. For the first time, the nurse felt something she hadn't expected, unease. Because the woman in front of her wasn't cowering. She wasn't pleading. She was studying her, calculating, measuring every action, every word. And though the nurse didn't know it yet, her fate, and the fate of everyone who had stood by silently, had already been sealed. Minutes passed. The staff went about their tasks, but the air felt heavier, thicker. A doctor finally entered, throwing a glance at the mother before turning to the nurse. "What's the problem here?" he asked lazily, as though he'd been dragged into yet another inconvenience. The nurse smirked. "Nothing I can't handle. Just another one of them making noise." She said it loud enough for the mother to hear, her words slicing like knives. The doctor shrugged, uninterested, and left just as quickly as he came. The message was clear: no one cared. No one but the mother. And that's when she did something no one expected. She pulled out her phone, her fingers moving swiftly. A single call. A few words. Nothing loud, nothing dramatic. Just quiet precision. The nurse scoffed, rolling her eyes, muttering under her breath about mothers who thought they were important. But in those few seconds, the atmosphere shifted. An energy began to hum in the air, subtle yet undeniable. The mother slid her phone back into her pocket and waited, her expression unreadable. The nurse, annoyed by the silence, pushed again. "What are you looking at? You think someone's coming to save you? You'll be waiting a long time." She laughed, shaking her head, her arrogance radiating. But deep down, a flicker of doubt began gnawing at her. Something about the mother's composure didn't fit the picture she'd drawn in her head. Most people broke down. Most people begged. Most people lowered their heads and accepted whatever cruelty was thrown at them. But this woman was different. She was still. She was calm. Too calm. And then, 10 minutes later, everything changed. It started with the sound of heavy footsteps echoing through the corridor. Not rushed, not chaotic, just steady, commanding. The kind of footsteps that made people stop what they were doing and look up. The receptionist froze, her pen hovering above her paper. The other nurses exchanged nervous glances. The arrogant nurse frowned, trying to mask the unease crawling up her spine. Then the doors swung open, and in walked a group of men and women dressed not in scrubs or lab coats, but in tailored suits, their presence radiating authority. They moved with precision, eyes sharp, posture straight, every step deliberate. At their center walked a man with a clipboard and a sharp gaze, scanning the room as though he had already read every sin hidden within these walls. The nurse blinked, suddenly unsure of herself. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her voice faltering slightly. The man didn't answer her. Instead, he turned to the mother, his tone respectful, almost reverent. "Ma'am, everything is ready. Do you want us to begin?" The nurse's jaw dropped. She looked from the suited man to the mother, confusion and disbelief battling across her face. "Wait, what? Who are you talking to?" she stammered. And then, the mother finally spoke, her voice calm, steady, but carrying the weight of authority that silenced the entire room. "Yes. Begin. I want every name, every report, every action documented. No one is walking out of this building untouched." The nurse's face drained of color. Her heart pounded, panic rising in her throat. She tried to laugh, to dismiss it. "What is this, some kind of joke? Who do you think you are?" But the answer was already in front of her. Because as the mother stood there, her child nestled safely in her arms, the truth began to ripple through the staff like wildfire. She wasn't just a patient. She wasn't just another mother. She was the owner. The woman whose name was signed on their paychecks. The one who had built the very foundation of the hospital they had taken for granted. And in 10 minutes, the tables had turned completely. The moment the truth landed in the air, it was like a lightning strike splitting the room in half. The arrogant nurse staggered back a step, her bravado crumbling as the realization took hold. The mother she had mocked, humiliated, and slapped was not powerless at all. She was the very reason every single person in that building had a job. The staff exchanged frantic glances, whispers spreading like wildfire. Some tried to straighten their postures, pretending they had been innocent bystanders, while others silently prayed they wouldn't be noticed. But there was no escaping the storm now. The suited team began moving through the hospital with precision, clipboards snapping open, phones buzzing with immediate orders. Every action, every whisper, every record was being noted. "Start with the nurse," the mother instructed quietly, her tone cold, measured. The head of the team turned, locking eyes with the trembling nurse. "Name?" he asked sharply. She stuttered, her voice breaking, but he already had it written down. "Report her incident. Full detail. Effective immediately. Suspend her license until the board reviews the case." Gasps rippled across the room. The nurse's face twisted with shock, then anger, then desperation. "You can't do this. I've been here for 15 years. Her protest was cut short by the man's stern glare. "You don't raise your hand to a patient, especially a mother holding her child. Not here. Not anywhere." The mother didn't flinch. She stood still, her baby resting peacefully against her chest, her voice like ice. 15 years of service means nothing if even one day of it is built on cruelty. You've forgotten compassion. You've forgotten humanity. And now, you've lost everything. The nurse's knees buckled. She tried to argue, to beg, but the suited staff escorted her away, her protests fading into the distance. The other employees watched in stunned silence, their faces pale, their throats dry. The hospital had always felt like their domain, a place where they held the power, where patients were forced to bow their heads and accept whatever treatment was given. But in 10 minutes, the power had shifted, and the very walls seemed to shake with it. The mother's gaze swept across the room, landing on the receptionist who had ignored her earlier. The young woman swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she fumbled with her papers. "Ma'am, I didn't mean any harm," she stammered. But the mother stepped closer, her voice cutting through the air. "You didn't lift a hand, but you stood silent. You watched cruelty unfold and said nothing. Silence makes you guilty too." Tears welled in the receptionist's eyes, but there was no mercy in the mother's tone. "You are dismissed. Effective immediately." A sob escaped the receptionist's lips as she collapsed into her chair, her head falling into her hands. The other staff members shuffled nervously, each one wondering if they would be next, each one remembering the little things they had done or failed to do, the rolled eyes, the harsh words, the careless neglect. And one by one, their names were called. The mother's team moved swiftly, uncovering records, pointing out repeated complaints, exposing misconduct that had been buried under paperwork and excuses. A doctor who had ignored patients for years, more interested in money than medicine, was stripped of his position. A nurse who had mocked families behind their backs was escorted out. A technician who had falsified reports to cover mistakes was handed his termination papers on the spot. Each revelation landed like a hammer, each dismissal a thunderclap shaking the hospital to its core. But through it all, the mother remained calm, her child resting peacefully in her arms, as if shielded by the strength radiating from her every word. She did not shout. She did not rage. She didn't need to. Her quiet authority was louder than any scream, sharper than any slap. The staff crumbled around her, their arrogance shattered, their power gone. And as each person was led away, the whispers grew louder. Some called her ruthless. Some called her heartless. But none could deny the truth, they had brought this upon themselves. For too long, they had treated the hospital as their kingdom, the patients as their servants, and compassion as a weakness. But in the end, it was compassion that destroyed them. Because the mother hadn't come there to punish. She had come to protect. And she would make sure no one else suffered what she had endured. Still, the room wasn't finished trembling. There were more secrets buried, more corruption festering behind those sterile walls. And the mother wasn't leaving until every last one was dragged into the light. The hospital's hallways, once filled with the casual bustle of nurses and doctors going about their routines, now felt like a courtroom. Every footstep echoed with judgment, every whisper carried the weight of fear. The suited investigators moved swiftly, unearthing files and calling names, while the mother stood as the silent axis around which everything turned. Her presence, calm and unshakable, made even the most confident staff member tremble. She wasn't merely exposing their behavior, she was dismantling the entire culture of arrogance and cruelty that had ruled these walls for years. The arrogant nurse had already been dragged out, her protest silenced by the truth of her actions. The receptionist had been dismissed, tears staining her cheeks. Doctors who had thought themselves untouchable were suddenly reduced to frightened figures, stripped of titles they had wielded like weapons. But the mother wasn't done. Her voice rang out again, quiet but cutting like glass. "Bring me the files. All of them. Complaints, reports, every letter ever ignored." The head investigator nodded, motioning for his team. Within minutes, boxes of dusty folders were rolled in, papers spilling over the edges, evidence of years of negligence and corruption. The mother's eyes scanned them briefly, then she raised her gaze, her tone sharper now. How many voices went unheard because of this staff? How many mothers cried in these halls? How many children suffered because you chose pride over compassion? Her words struck harder than any punishment. The staff shifted uncomfortably, some biting their lips, others lowering their eyes, each one silently remembering the faces of those they had failed. A trembling nurse stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "Please," she whispered, "I only did what they told me. I didn't want to lose my job." The mother studied her for a long moment, then shook her head slowly. "Fear may excuse silence, but it does not excuse cruelty. You may leave with your conscience, but you will not leave with this badge." The nurse collapsed into sobs as her ID was taken from her, the reality of her dismissal crashing down. Then the doors opened again, this time revealing not just investigators, but men in darker suits with government seals pinned to their lapels. The hospital director had arrived, his face pale, his posture stiff. He walked in briskly, his voice trembling with forced authority. "What is going on here?" he demanded, though his tone betrayed his fear. The suited investigators stepped aside, leaving the mother in clear view. She turned her gaze toward him, unblinking. "What's going on?" she said, her voice calm but firm, "is the consequence of years of neglect under your watch." The director's throat tightened. He tried to laugh it off, to dismiss it. "You can't possibly think," but she cut him off with a single raised hand. "Enough. I have seen the records. I have heard the stories. And today, I have lived the proof. A nurse in your hospital struck me while I held my child, and your staff did nothing." Not one voice rose to stop her. "This is the culture you created. And this ends today." Gasps rippled again. The director opened his mouth to protest, but before he could, the lead investigator handed him a folder. "Evidence is overwhelming. The board will be notified immediately. Effective now, your authority is suspended." His face drained of color, his lips quivering as he tried to form words. But there was nothing left to say. The mother had stripped him of power with nothing but truth. As he was escorted out, murmurs spread among the remaining staff. Some were relieved, some were furious, but all of them knew one thing: the hospital they had once controlled was no longer theirs. It belonged to compassion, to accountability, to the mother who stood before them as both victim and judge. And still, the mother did not stop. "Check the financials," she ordered. Her voice carried the calm of a woman who had already won, but the determination of someone unwilling to leave any stone unturned. The investigators nodded, pulling files from cabinets, accessing digital logs. Within minutes, more corruption surfaced, funds misused, patients overcharged, resources stolen. The rot ran deep, and it was being ripped out root by root. The staff who remained watched in horror as their world collapsed. The woman they had underestimated had become their reckoning. 10 minutes had turned into a revolution. And now, with every document revealed, with every name called, the hospital's darkest secrets spilled into the light. But the climax was still building. Because beyond the corruption, beyond the negligence, there was one final truth waiting to be revealed. A truth so devastating, it would not only dismantle the staff but shake the entire city. And the mother, holding her child close, was prepared to reveal it all.